mother used to work a late-night security job between midnight and 8 in the morning. She had worked other jobs in the past, with similar hours pretty much for the length of my entire childhood. My dad had passed away when I was really young, so from elementary school through middle school, I would have a babysitter watching over me for the night, so I was never alone. But once I became a freshman in high school, I finally stopped having a babysitter watch over me for the night, after convincing my mom that I was old enough and mature enough to not need one. I was a pretty good kid, so I never really did anything crazy, like throw parties or sneak out during the middle of the night. But one Friday night, after my mom had left to work, I invited one of my friends, Matthew, to come over and hang out, which I had done several times in the past. He arrived within about 15 minutes after sneaking out of his house. We were eating junk food, playing Call of Duty, and bullshitting about the most random crap for hours. But our conversation was interrupted by the sound of my Maltese, Sammy, barking loudly at the sliding glass door which led to my backyard. We both got off of the couch to see what was bothering her, when Sammy suddenly rushes out of the doggy door while still barking. It was pitch black in my yard, so I had to turn on the backyard lights to see where she had went. I flipped the light switch, which instantly illuminated about half of my yard. And there, Matthew and I saw Sammy in the middle of my lawn, still barking aggressively at what seemed to be nothing. Sammy probably just saw a squirrel or something, Matthew said. I tried whistling for Sammy to come back inside, but she ignored me completely and continued growling and staring off into the distance. I'm going to go out and grab her, I told Matthew. I slid open the glass door and jogged towards my dog. What's the matter, girl? Come on, let's go inside of the house. I bent down to pick her up, but Sammy just continued to growl. I had my cell phone on me, so I pulled it out of my pocket and decided I would shine my phone's flashlight to see if I could spot what had Sammy acting so crazy. I clicked the button to turn on the light and shined it towards the end of my yard where my fence was. And at the fence, no less than 20 feet away from where I stood, was a man wearing raggedy clothing with straggly long hair. There was a sinister grin spread across his face, and my phone's light reflected off of his crazy eyes, which were opened wide and staring directly at me. He took one step towards me, and in a panicked state, I dropped my cell phone on the ground and ran with my dog back into the house. I could hear that he was chasing me. I immediately slid the glass door shut and locked it. The man pressed his face against the sliding glass door and was laughing hysterically like a fucking lunatic while fidgeting with the door trying to get it open. Matthew quickly realized what was going on, and we both ran to every window and door to make sure everything was locked. My heart was pounding, and it became difficult for me to even breathe. We went back to the living room where the backyard door was to see if the man was still there, but he vanished. We armed ourselves with large knives from the kitchen and used Matthew's phone to call 911. As Matthew was on the line with the operator, I realized Sammy wasn't in the living room with us, and I couldn't hear her barking anymore. I ran upstairs to see if she was up there, but she wasn't. When it suddenly hit me, I never locked her doggy door. I bolted down the stairs and looked out the backyard window. What I saw next completely destroyed me. Outside, right on the porch in front of the glass door, was Sammy. She was floor by the stranger's right foot, and I could hear her whimpering. I screamed and begged for the man to stop stepping on her. He just looked at me, with the same sickening smile. He glanced down at Sammy, and stomped on her chest with full force. And without hesitation, did so 5 more times, crushing her completely. The tears rolled down my face, and Matthew was yelling at the 911 operator to send someone now. He was even giving her a detailed description of the man. I felt sick to my stomach and threw up on the floor. The most disgusting thing of all was that the man seemed so pleased with what he had done, and he continued looking at me through the glass as I fell to my knees and sobbed. He then simply turned around and walked away. We were confused by this, and truly didn't understand what this demented fuck's motive was for even committing such a disturbing act. By the time the police and my mother arrived, he was long gone. My phone was no longer in the backyard, so we assumed the man had taken it. My mother and I ended up moving shortly after, because we no longer felt safe staying there. What kills me is that he was never caught. It was all just so senseless, cruel, and random. And 5 years later, I still have a crystal clear memory of the things that took place on that horrific night. And I live in constant fear that somehow, some way, I will run into him again. Luckily, that hasn't happened. But unfortunately for me, I think I'll be living in constant paranoia for the rest of my life.
Number 2.
My parents had a beautiful log cabin up in the mountains that my family would regularly visit every winter for the holiday season. I was the youngest of 4 siblings. I had 3 older brothers as well as 1 older sister. We all had keys to the cabin, but lived in separate parts of the country, so we would all arrive there at different times. This year, for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to be the very first one to arrive to the cabin. Looking back on it, I am not entirely sure what made me want to do this, but I digress. I took a flight to Colorado, where our cabin was located. I timed it just right, so I would arrive a full 3 hours before my parents and siblings' estimated time of arrival. Once I finally got to the cabin, I noticed that a light was on from inside of the home, but there were no cars outside in the driveway. Damn it, someone beat me here, I thought to myself. I knocked on the front door, but didn't receive an answer, so I just ended up unlocking the door myself. I stepped inside the warm cabin and shut the door behind me. I went upstairs to put my belongings away and shouted, "Mom? Dad? I'm home," assuming that my parents were the ones who got here first. But nobody responded, which I thought was a bit odd, but I just continued unpacking all of my things. Once I was finished, I went back downstairs to try and find my parents or siblings or whoever was home, but I found no one. Maybe I am the only one here after all. But why were the lights on? I thought to myself. When a few moments later, I heard the sound of the front door opening. I made my way over to the front, expecting to see a family member. But instead, I was standing face to face with the creepiest girl I had ever seen in my entire life. She was probably in her early 20s and had very long black hair that covered most of her face. She was wearing one of my mom's winter coats, and she had some of my family's belongings in her hands. I ordered her to drop our stuff and get the fuck out. She dropped everything, but she didn't leave the house. She continued to stand there, and I told her, "If you don't walk out right now, I will throw you out." I am a pretty big guy, so I was surprised when she wasn't fazed by my threats. She just stood there, kinda motionless and expressionless. I became enraged by this point, and I started walking towards her, when she suddenly ran to the right, directly into the kitchen. I chased after her, and wasn't that far behind, but somehow she was now out of sight. I was in shock, because there's no way she could have disappeared that quickly. The only way she could have gone was from the kitchen to the yard, but I never heard the door open. I looked out the window, but didn't see any sign of her. She must be hiding, I thought to myself. I scanned the room, when I noticed a foot was sticking out from underneath the table, which was covered by a long tablecloth. I pulled on her leg, in attempts to get her out of there. She started yelling by this point, which exposed her yellow teeth. They were a really gross, dark yellow-brown color, and she lunged towards my hand that was on her ankle. She fucking bit my wrist, which caused me to release my grip. I fell to the floor, and she ran straight out the front door. I called the police department, as well as my family. My parents and siblings arrived before the cops did, and they were in complete disbelief at what I had just told them. When the cops arrived, they did manage to find some footprints in the snow, but it never led to the intruder. Upon further investigation, we found out that she must have broken in and had been living inside of this home for God knows how long, considering it was just our vacation home and it was usually unoccupied. I, of course, went to the doctor for my bite, and thankfully it wasn't infected. I'm not sure whatever became of that weird girl, but we did end up selling the cabin a couple of months right after the incident.